In this video, I'll be finding out exactly the differences specifying the big wheel option for your new car really makes. Before I start testing, I just want to quickly tell you about the tyres because these are something quite special. This is the new Michelin Pilot Sport 4S N-rated, specifically for the 992 911. And because we're using the 911 to test, the small wheel size, small, is a 19-inch front, 20-inch rear, and the big is a 20-inch front and a 21-inch rear. And you'll probably notice here, they're actually wider, so the bigger set of wheels is slightly wider on the front and rear axle. Michelin say this is the most complicated OE tyre they've ever made. They spent 3 years working very closely with Porsche to get the perfect tyre for the 911. It's multi-compound, very special construction, and they haven't just copy and pasted slightly bigger, the smaller wheel size. They had different people working on the 1920 and 2021 to ensure the difference in wheel sizes is compensated for, which I think is absolutely insane and incredible, and just shows the attention to detail people like Porsche and Michelin really do go to make sure everything is as perfect as possible. Have they achieved their goals? Let's get on testing. Right, so before we go on to the really exciting handling bits of the test, which I am super excited for, I want to talk a little bit about the real world use of these tyres, because most of the time a car like this is going to be used on the road. So what does that mean? Firstly, safety. Braking is something that shouldn't be compromised whatever the wheel size, and luckily and actually impressively, considering different widths of tyres and the different wheel sizes, the dry and wet braking is identical. Like, super impressive. I was surprised because you'd think there would be a little bit of variance, but in this test at these temperatures on this day, the same. Noise and comfort, now that's kind of where I was expecting quite a big difference. And I've already said there were different people designing the 1920 and 2021. It's not that Michelin have just expanded or reduced one tyre they've designed. They've designed two different sets of tyres to make sure that the differences in wheel size don't affect the handling of car. And they've done a very good job. We know Porsche are demanding, but Michelin have absolutely nailed it, because generally the noise and comfort is so close between the tyres, closer than I thought it was going to be. Yes, the 2021, the larger wheel size, is a little bit more crashy over the bigger road imperfections, but generally it's very hard to notice much difference on all but the roughest roads. Same for internal noise. There might be a slightly higher decibel into the cabin, but it's very hard for me to tell. The thing people are going to notice the most is basically the steering weight. The 1920, the smaller front wheel on the front axle, is easier to turn. It's just a lighter steering car, and you could probably argue that that's less sporty, but it's only the steering weight. At road speeds, the reaction of the steering is very similar. I think this is probably going to be magnified on track, as it often is, but if you're just driving day to day, honestly, you're not going to feel shortchanged with the 1920. You're not going to feel like you've put two bigger wheels on with the 2021. Michelin and Porsche have done an outstanding job on the road. However, these cars do get used on track, and that's probably why you're watching. Let's go on to wet handling. No car with its engine over the rear axle should drive like this. It's an engineering masterpiece. You can just go sideways for days. Anyway, I started wet handling on the 2021. It's a mega impressive combination of tyres. There was maybe a slight bit of hydroplaning at points, but that's about the only negative thing I can say about them. The front rear balance was outstanding. There was minimal understeer. There was minimal oversteer. If you wanted to push on, you could really control the car. The steering was direct and precise, and the grip levels, considering Michelin say this 2021 package that I'm on now was optimized more for dry than the 1920, you cannot tell, because the thing just sticks and sticks. It probably helps, it's quite warm today, 35 degrees, which is in the 90s if you're a Fahrenheit person, but you can just make this car absolutely dance, and I absolutely love this. But we are here to compare it against the 1920. And how does it differ? Well, the 1920 was a little bit slower, about 3/4 of a second over quite a long lap. So in percentage terms, quite small, but I did notice just a little bit more oversteer in the balance. It almost felt like where the 2021, the front rear axle balancing grip was outstanding, the 1920, I think it just had a little bit more front axle. The car was still very, very, very good. We're talking 3/4 of a second over a minute lap. So like, I'm talking about very small margins here, but there was just a tiny bit more oversteer as you were turning in. So the rear wasn't, it was front axle authority, I think is the technical term. There was slightly less hydroplaning. There wasn't much, or aquaplaning, whatever you want to call it. There wasn't much overall, but I think maybe on the narrower wheel, which is probably natural, the narrower wheel did mean ever so slight less aquaplaning. And when the rear did start to slide on the 20-inch rear, not the 21, it was a bit more progressive. So while it did start sliding earlier, and but again, I'm talking about very small differences, while it did start sliding earlier, it was a little bit more controllable when it was sliding. So I guess the conclusion is both sets of tyres are incredibly close in terms of grip, controllability and enjoyability. But if becoming a drift master in your 911 in the wet is your only goal, the 1920 is slightly better. But apart from that, you're not missing any sportiness on the 1920 that you had on the 2021 really. It's that close in the wet. Anyway, I really hope dry handling spreads things out a little bit. Otherwise this video is going to be a huge waste of time, other than, I mean, giving me a really good day's work. Firstly, no base spec car should feel this good. This is the Carrera 2. I mean, it's £110,000 base spec car, but it's the base 911, and this thing is unfreaking believable with these tyres. But anyway, the tyres, the wheels, there is some differences. Good news for me, good news for the video, good news for content. I started on the 1920, and don't get me wrong, these aren't bad, but this is where on these very high speed, high loads, you start to notice a little bit more of the sidewall. I think is probably the best thing to say. Firstly, on the brakes, both excellent, but I feel like the 1920s just lacked a little bit of that initial bite the 2021s had when they were very hot. But the biggest thing wasn't so much the initial steering reaction and steering speed, but it was as the tyre load built up, it just took a little bit more time to settle. And there's one point in this track where you're doing about 200 kilometers an hour, very high load right-hander, and you go over a bit of a crest, and it was there where you just lost a little bit of confidence. You felt unsettled by the front axle as the car kind of lifted and then sat back onto the tyre. There was just this little bit of movement. Don't get me wrong, you'd never experience those kind of lows on the road, absolutely not, unless you're a complete idiot. But on the track, that was noticeable. But the balance between the front and the rear was outstanding. There was no understeer in the package whatsoever, and that I love. I absolutely love. And the rear, like in the wet, was progressive. Moving to the 2021, oh yeah, this is where you can see the extra Cup 2 kind of compound. The braking, like now, I'm on them. Outstanding, man. Feels like you've hit a wall. You could absolutely rely on the rear. The rear was so planted, it was almost difficult to get oversteer. But when you did get oversteer, like in the wet, it was just a little bit quicker to come around. If I'm going to be negative, and I'm going to start with the negative, there was a little bit more understeer in the package on the 2021, but the grip levels were definitely higher. I was over a second a lap quicker, which is a lot of time around this circuit. And you were just more part of the driving experience. You were more connected. You were more ingrained with what was happening in the front axle. You could feel the tyre moving around on the tarmac as the micro grip and reactions were all taking place. And it's just a wonderful connected experience. The instability over the bump, which I just went over, that had also gone. It just felt more like a track tyre. Honestly, so this track, the Michelin's dry handling track, is an absolute tyre destroyer. I have overheated tyres in half a lap here. Both sets of tyres wouldn't let go. My fourth lap, and I did 4 instead of 3, my fourth lap was pretty much as quick as my first lap on both sets of tyres, but I think it's fair to say the 2021 just enjoyed being a little bit hotter. It just relished at this opportunity to stab the car into the corners, to trail the brakes in and then get on the throttle as early as possible to try and just encourage the car to do what you want it to do. And for that reason, if I was doing a track day, I think that's where the biggest difference is. The 1920, you would have an enjoyable track experience as an amateur driver, no doubt about it. But if you wanted to get on it, heck, I'd use this 4S, this NAO marked 4S as a track tyre. I don't know if it's because it's got a bit of the Cup 2 compound in, but it just goes like the Cup 2. It feels like a track tyre. It's mega impressive, and like I said, the heat management is outstanding, as is the wear characteristics, because for filming, so I went out on the 2021 and hammered around a load more and probably did about 15-20 laps, and I still hadn't destroyed the front tyres. And I've said it before, I've destroyed pretty much every tyre I've possibly driven around here in a handful of laps, and in these temperatures, on this kind of driving, on this kind of vehicle, Michelin, you've done a great job. That 2021 package as a dry track day tyre, just outstanding. Thoroughly enjoyable, thoroughly impressive. Even if there was a little bit more understeer in the 2021, every other benefit it brings on high load on track is just, what a machine, what a combination. So I hope you found this test as interesting as I found enjoyable. Now, admittedly, this is a bit of a special case. This probably doesn't exactly apply to maybe a Ford Focus on a 16-inch or a 17-inch wheel fitment. I have actually got a video on that, so go check it out. I'll link it below. But this does go to show the engineering genius of people like Michelin and Porsche, and exactly what they can do to engineer the differences between wheel sizes if they put the time and effort in, and they absolutely have. This package of Porsche and tyre is unbelievable. The 2021, outstanding on track. It kind of felt like a track day tyre at points, and it was enjoyable and fun and predictable and managed the heat well and didn't fall off in grip, and the wear was outstanding. But that's not to say the 1920 is a bad option. On the road, you'd be really happy with it. And I think most people on track would be even happy with it as well. But that was where the difference was. The bigger wheel size on track had the advantage, but everywhere else it was almost too close to call. So impressive work by Michelin and Porsche. Impressive vehicle as well. Like I said in dry handling, this is the base spec Carrera 2. I cannot translate via video how good it is for a base spec car. I've driven a GT3 RS, I've driven a GT3, you know they're going to be good, but this was outstanding. I'm not sure if it's the tyres or I'm not sure if it's the car, I'm sure it's a combination of both, but what a car. I'd really need to try myself a manual GTS rear-wheel drive. I think that's on my new to-do list. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed the video. Any questions, please ask below, and as always, safe motoring.